The Civil War had ended, but the country had not yet exhaled. Richmond had fallen, Lee had surrendered at Appomattox. Confederate armies across the South were laying down their arms. For the first time in 4 years, America could imagine a future that did not resolve around the death lists and battlefield maps. And then 5 days later, Abraham Lincoln was shot. The war had taken more than 600,000 lives, and at the moment when the nation needed its steady hand most, the president who had held it together was violently removed. And what followed was not just a murder, it was a national rupture. Welcome to our republic.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political band,
sailors and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not
Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
By April 1865, Washington was celebrating. Churches rang bells, crowds gathered, soldiers marched home. The Union had survived the greatest internal threat it would ever face. But beneath the celebration ran fear. The South was defeated, but not reconciled. Millions were displaced. Former Confederate soldiers returned to shattered homes. Newly freed slaves faced an uncertain future. Reconstruction loomed, undefined and volatile. Lincoln understood this moment was dangerous. He spoke repeatedly of mercy, reconciliation, and restraint. In his second inaugural address, delivered just weeks earlier, he urged Americans to act with malice towards none, with charity for all. That posture made him revered by some and hated by others. John Wilkes Booth was not just a random madman. He was a well-known actor, a celebrity in his time, and a fierce Confederate sympathizer. He believed Lincoln was a tyrant. He believed the war had destroyed the South, and he believed violence was justified. This is very interesting because I believe that we're in this same kind of moment where we've got the left believing that our president is a tyrant, and they believe that violence is justified. History repeats itself. Originally, Booth and his associates planned to kidnap Lincoln, hoping to trade him for Confederate prisoners. But as the Confederacy collapsed, that plan escalated. Booth decided Lincoln must die. The conspiracy expanded to include attacks on other members of government. Vice President Andrew Johnson, the Secretary of State William Seward were also targeted. This was not just an assassination. It was an attempt to decapitate the federal government. On Good Friday, April 14th, 1865, Lincoln decided to attend a performance of Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater. He went not as a commander-in-chief at war, but as a husband seeking relief after years of unbearable pressure. Security was minimal. The war was over. Washington felt safe. Booth knew the theater intimately. He slipped into the presidential box and just after 10 p.m., fired a single shot into the back of Lincoln's head. The president slumped over. Booth leapt to the stage, shouted a Latin phrase associated with tyrannicide, and fled into the night. The audience initially thought it was part of the performance. It was not. Lincoln was carried across the street to a boarding house. Doctors worked through the night, but the wound was fatal. There was nothing they could do. I actually had the opportunity to go see some of the exhibit pieces from the American Experience owned by Glenn Beck, and held a piece of Lincoln's cloth coat that still had the blood stain on it. I'll put the picture up on Instagram or X or something like that. But it was an eerie feeling to hold the bloodstained jacket of President Lincoln. Or a piece of it, not the whole thing, obviously. As dawn approached, members of the cabinet gathered, soldiers stood watch, clergy prayed. The war president, who had navigated rebellion, invasion, famine, and slaughter, lay unconscious. At 7:22 a.m. on April 15th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln died. The Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, reportedly said, "Now he belongs to the ages." Washington panicked. With rumors of wider conspiracy, the government feared additional attacks. Troops sealed the city, bridges were closed, telegraph lines buzzed with alerts, and a massive manhunt began. Booth fled south, but was cornered 12 days later in a Virginia barn. He was shot by Union soldiers and died shortly thereafter. Other conspirators were captured, tried by military commission, and executed. The government moved swiftly, partly out of justice, partly out of fear that the fragile peace could collapse into renewed violence. Lincoln's funeral train traveled over 1,600 miles, retracing the path he had taken to Washington as president-elect in 1861. Millions lined the tracks. Cities fell silent, churches draped in black, veterans wept openly, former slaves knelt in prayer, and Union soldiers saluted. Confederate sympathizers watched in stunned quiet. For many Americans, the funeral was the moment the war finally became real. It was not as strategy or politics, but as personal loss. Lincoln had become something larger than a president. He became the embodiment of the Union himself. Lincoln's assassination changed the course of American history. Reconstruction fell into less capable hands. Andrew Jackson lacked Lincoln's authority, restraint, and political skill. Sectional bitterness hardened, opportunities for reconciliation narrowed. What Appomattox had made possible, Lincoln's death actually complicated. The nation would move forward, but not smoothly and not united in purpose. His absence was felt immediately. Abraham Lincoln survived 4 years of war that killed hundreds of thousands of men. He held a fractured nation together through defeat, victory, and exhaustion. And just as peace arrived, violence took him. His assassination was not only a crime, it was a test of whether the republic he saved could endure without him. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate your time. And please remember, history isn't boring. It's the story of a nation that survived a war and then had to survive the loss of a man that held it together. I'll see you next time.